that was supposed to be good for us. I thought she was crazy. If the Hostess Twinkies were good enough for the kids on TV, then why weren't they good enough for me? But my mother remained unmoved, and I remained disgusted. I was a puppet, and I didn't even know who was pulling the strings. One year, everybody was wearing buttons on their coats. Some had writing on them, and others had pictures of movie stars. I went somewhere with my mother and my aunt, and they asked me if I wanted a button. I picked out one with Elvis Presley on it. All the kids at school thought Elvis Presley was cool. I wore that button religiously all winter and that summer, and when I went down south, I went to see one of Elvis Presley's movies. In Wilmington, at that time, there was only one movie theater where black people were allowed to go. It was called the Bailey Theater. Once you bought your ticket, you went up a staircase and on the side of the theater to the good second balcony. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, I read that really wrong. Once you bought your ticket, you went up a long staircase on the side of the theater to the second balcony, the colored section. Shame on you if you were nearsighted. The movie was like all the rest of Elvis movies, forgettable. When it was over, I went downstairs. All the white kids were leaving with pictures of Elvis Presley that they had bought. I started to walk to my grandparents' restaurant on Red Cross Street, but then I turned around and walked back. If the white kids could have a picture of Elvis, then so could I. At least I was going to try. I knew it would be absolutely no use to go to the ticket booth and ask the woman anything. She would most assuredly say no. So I walked right on past her, straight into the white section of the theater. What a surprise it was. It was just like the movies in New York. They had soda machines, a butter popcorn machine, and all kinds of candy and potato chips and things. Upstairs in the colored section, they had some old, stale, plain popcorn and a few candy bars, and that was it. The moment I walked in, all the action stopped. Everybody's eyes were on me. I walked over to the counter where they were selling the pictures. Sorry, I thought of some lyrics that someone would say at this part. My bad, let me get something to drink. I don't want to talk about the pink lady. I walked over to the counter where they were selling the pictures. Before I could open my mouth, the sales girl told me, "You're in the wrong section. Just go outside and go up the stairs on the side." "I want to buy a picture of Elvis Presley," I said. "What'd you say again?" she drawled. "I want to buy a picture of Elvis Presley," I repeated. "They don't have any upstairs." "Well, I don't know," she said. "I have to go get the manager." She said something to the other woman behind the counter and then left. By this time, a crowd had gathered around me. "What's she doing in here?" they kept asking each other. "Now she knows better," somebody was saying. "Look, Ma, a colored girl." "You get lost, honey?" "What's she want? Don't they have no pictures in the color section? What she need a picture anyway?" The crowd was all around me, gawking. It seemed like the manager would never come. "Can't she read? Don't she know that you're not allowed and there's no colors allowed in here?" "I don't know what it's about. Something about a picture." She came walking right in here bold as day. Finally, the salesgirl came back. A man was with her. All eyes were fixed on the manager. He took one look at me and another at the crowd forming around me. "Give her the picture and get her out of here," he told the salesgirl. Hurriedly, she sold me the picture. I'll grab something to drink. "All right, folks, it's all over now. Go on about your business." I took my picture and went prancing out and into the daylight. I was feeling good. It seemed funny when I thought about it. The looks on those crackers' faces, all puffed up like balloons. I had a good time, laughing all the way to my grandparents' restaurant. And of course, the minute I got there, I told everybody what happened. I was just so proud. I took my picture and put it on the back counter right next to the funeral parlor calendar. The picture stayed there a few days until Johnny from the cab stand across the street came and told me that Elvis had said the only thing a black person could do for him was to buy his records and shine his shoes. Quietly, I slid the picture into obscurity, then oblivion. Later, I read that Elvis had given Spiro Agnew a gold-plated .357 Magnum and had volunteered to work for the FBI. Evelyn, my aunt, was the heroine of my childhood. She was always taking me places and exposing me to things, as she would put it. She took me to museums. and I think we visited just about every museum in the city of New York. She turned me into a real art lover. Before I was 10, I could recognize a Van Gogh on sight, and I knew what cubism, surrealism, and abstract expressionism were. Picasso, Gauguin, I don't know how to pronounce that, Van Gogh, and Modigliani were my favorite artists. I didn't know the name of one black artist in those days. Very few, if any, museums exhibited the work of black artists, so I just assumed that black people weren't too good at painting. But I learned about African art from my mother. From the time I can remember, my mother always had African sculptures in the house. It was the only kind she had. I always loved those pieces, and it really annoyed me when I took art history in school and the teacher referred to African art as primitive. In fact, if the art was by anyone else but a white person, it was called primitive art. In addition to museums, Evelyn would take me to see plays and movies, and we would experiment with all kinds of restaurants. She would go to parks, go bicycle riding, and it was Evelyn who gave me my first rowboat lesson. She was very sophisticated and knew all kinds of things. She was right up my alley because I was forever asking all kinds of questions. I wanted to know everything. She would give me a book and say, "Read this." I would eat it up. I would eat up that book like it was ice cream. It was Evelyn who took me to see my first show at the Apollo. We saw Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. I was walking on clouds. After that, as soon as I learned to ride the subway by myself, I went to the daytime shows. If my mother and my aunt had known, they would have had a fit. I guess people wondered what this little girl was doing in the Apollo all by herself, but nobody ever bothered me. I was always pretty lucky that way. Barbara was a little girl who lived next door to us in Queens. She was my main friend and foe for quite a while. One day I saw her leaving her house wearing a white dress and a little white veil like a bride wears. Everything she had on was white, all all the way down to her shoes. She even had a little white Bible in her hands. I thought she was going to be in a Tom Thumb wedding like they had down south. So I went up to her and asked her who she was marrying. She said she was making her first communion, that she was Catholic. Well, I became an instant convert. I wanted to wear white dress and dress up like a bride too. And Catholics even got out early from school on Wednesdays. I raced home to tell my mother. My mother was very permissive where religion was concerned. She gave us carte blanche to be Catholics, Baptists, Methodists, or whatever. So I started going to Mass and to, is it Catholicism? Catechism, I think that's the word. Catechism classes on Wednesday. The Catholic Church was like no other church I had ever been to. Down south, I always went to church, but those services were rich with music and emotion. I would sit caught up in the music and watch those people who had got happy or got the spirit jumping around all over the place. I was never holy, but I had liked going to church. In the black churches that I had been in, the air was charged. The music rocked and the preacher preached and sang at the same time. People felt free to do what they needed to do. If they felt like dancing, they danced. If they felt like praying, they prayed. And if they felt like screaming, they screamed. And if they felt like crying, then they cried. The church was there to give them strength and to get them through the long week ahead of them. Where we lived in Queens, there was no black church. The Catholic Church was different. It was silent and cold. The music was terrible, and you couldn't understand 9/10 of the service. But what fascinated me was the spookiness of it. They had so much weird stuff attached to their religion. When you walked in the door, you had to cross yourself with holy water. Then, before you could sit down, you had to genuflect. And throughout the Mass, you were forever up and down, sitting, standing, kneeling. And there was so much stuff to learn. The stations of the cross, rosary beads, lighting candles, going to confession. It was also spooky. I just knew that this had to be the real God. The nuns really tripped me out. They walked around with rings on their fingers saying that they were married to God. That was really weird. And they could never have children or do it. And people said they had bald heads under their habits. I was simply overwhelmed. The catechism class was nothing like Sunday school. They never told good stories about Jesus, and we never sang Jesus Loves Me. In catechism class, we learned all about the saints. It seemed like we learned all about the saints. It seemed like they had a million of them. And then there was the Virgin Mary. They made a big deal out of her. They even had us praying to her. I would do it, but the story was always kind of hard for me to swallow. Nothing about the Catholics was simple. They even had different kinds of hell. They had a special one for babies, and then had one in between, and then they had the show enough hell. They even had two kinds of sin. I could still hear the nun as if it were yesterday. Now a venial sin is a sin that's not so bad. It's a white sin. But a mortal sin is terrible. It is a black sin. The night before I was to make my first communion, I had to run to the church with my baptismal certificate. They needed it to prove I had been baptized. My mother had had a hell of a time finding it. I was tickled to be going because they told me to bring it to I was tickled to be going because they told me to bring it to the convent where the nuns lived. I had been dying to see what it looked like inside. It was just as cold and lifeless as the church. When I gave the nun my baptismal certificate, she looked at it and almost jumped out of her chair. "Oh no, this won't do," she said. "This is not a Catholic baptismal certificate. You weren't really baptized." "What?" I said. "I was too baptized." "No, you weren't," she said. "It's not a Catholic baptism, so it doesn't count. You'll have to be baptized tonight or you can't make your first communion tomorrow." Hold on, grab something to drink. All right, let's see, where am I at? I was not ready for that one. I caught an instant attitude. She was talking about my godparents like they were dirt under her feet. They called my mother and told her she had to come to the church. Then they got these total strangers from somewhere and told me they were supposed to be my godparents, and then they baptized me. I never saw those people again, and if you asked me their names, I couldn't tell you. I had had a godmother for all my life, and here they were telling me she wasn't my godmother because she wasn't Catholic. They really made me mad that day, but I didn't say too much about it. I really wanted to make my first communion. I did, and later my confirmation, but I never looked at them the same. The sixth grade passed along rather uneventfully. There was another black in my class, Gail. She became friendly, but my relationship with the white kids deteriorated even more. They made it pretty evident that they didn't care too much for me, and I made it clear right back that I didn't care for them. The thing I disliked most about them was their assumptions about me. For one thing, they automatically assumed that I was stupid, and they would really act surprised when I showed and had some brains. One of the biggest fights I had was when this kid was in my class, couldn't find some pen that his father had given him, and accused me of stealing it. I waited for him outside the classroom, and as soon as he came out the door, I jumped on him like a crazy person. Yo, that's like my favorite part. Assata said, "These hands is rated E for everyone." I know that's fucking right. I never thought, oh wait, I'm surprised at you, they kept saying. "I never thought you act that way." I was usually very quiet and well behaved. They acted like I had jumped on that boy for nothing, and they couldn't understand why I was so angry. As a matter of fact, even I didn't understand then. Outside of school was a whole nother matter. When I wasn't doing homework or chores, I would go exploring. My bicycle was one of the great loves of my life. I could jump on it and ride all over Queens. Sometimes on Saturdays or Sundays, I would ride all day long, leaving early in the morning and returning as late as I was allowed to. And if I wasn't on my bicycle, I was somewhere playing with my friends. We played everything from house to handball. I played with the boys more than with the girls because the boys had better games. I loved punchball and handball, anything that involved running. The playground was right across the street from my house, and I took full advantage of everything that was there. I played hopscotch, marbles, and cowboys and Indians. I always wanted to be an Indian and would hide over or under something and leap out shrieking at the top of my lungs. I guess I was unusual in that respect because most of the kids wanted to be cowboys. I was always rough, and clumsy, and I played everything as if my life depended on it. Some of the girls didn't like to play with me because they said I was too rough, and I was always excluded from the rope jumping sessions. I was too clumsy to jump double dutch, and they didn't even like me to turn because they said I was too uneven handed. But I always had one best friend, and she was always a girl. I had other friends to play with and hang out with, but I always had one special friend that I could really talk to. We would go to the candy store and the movies and plays and places like that, and we would sit and talk for hours about just anything. By the time I reached the sixth grade, I began to idolize and imitate the big kids who went to junior high school. I couldn't wait to grow up. The grown up world was so exciting, and when you were grown up, you could do anything you wanted to. Besides, I was beginning to feel different. I was beginning to feel interested in boys. This one's called Cracker Jacks. I could have told you in the old days in the park or skating down some hill what it was all about. I could have sat next to you on some stairway and gave you half my bubble gum, and in between the bubbles and the giggles, I could have told you. But we are grown now, and it is all so complicated when you dig somebody. Now, when I open up about my Cracker Jacks, or when I open up my Cracker Jacks, I find no heart-shaped ring, only a puzzle that I don't want to solve. Damn. So this is chapter 3. And it's probably be the last one I read. Hold on, let me grab something to drink. I really hope the space records this time, because last night it didn't. But anyways, chapter 3. It seemed like the middle of the night. Someone was calling me, waking me up. What did they want? Suddenly I was aware of all kinds of activity. Police, the crackling of walkie-talkies, the place was buzzing. Here, put this on, one of them said, handing me a bathrobe. What's going on? I asked. You're being moved. Where am I being moved to? You'll find out when you get there. A wheelchair was waiting. I figured they were taking me to jail. There was a caravan of police cars outside the hospital. It looked like I was going to be in a parade again. The ride was unpleasant. Just looking at houses and trees and people passing by in cars was good. We arrived at the prison at sunrise in the middle of nowhere. It was an ugly 2-story brick building. They pushed me up the stairs to the second floor. I was put in a cell with 2 doors. A door of bars was on the inside, and directly outside of that was a heavy metal door with a tiny peephole that I could barely see through. The cell contained a cot with a rough green blanket on it and a dirty white wooden bench with 100 names scratched on it. Adjacent to the cell was a bathroom with a sink, a toilet, and a shower. Hanging above the sink was the bottom of a pot or pan. It was supposed to serve as a mirror, but I could barely see myself in it. There was one window covered by 3 thick metal screens facing a parking lot, a field, and in the distance, a wooded area. I walked around the cell to the back, to the window, to the door, back and forth until I had tired myself out. I was still pretty weak. Then I laid down on the cot and wondered what this place was going to be like. Here I was, my first day in prison. In about an hour, a guard unlocked the outside door and asked me if I wanted breakfast. I said yes. In a few minutes, she came back with eggs and bread in a plastic bowl and a metal cup containing something that was supposed to be coffee. The eggs didn't taste too bad. Maybe prison food isn't as bad as they say it is, I remember thinking. I heard voices, and it was clear they weren't police voices. Then the radio came on. Black music. It sounded so good. I looked through the peephole and saw faces, weird and distorted because of the concave glass, but black faces to match the black voices I had heard. How y'all doing? I asked. No response. Then I realized how thick the metal door was, so I shouted this time. How y'all doing? A chorus of muffled whines came back. I was feeling good. Real people were just on the other side of the wall. The guard opened up the metal door and handed me some uniforms, maid uniforms, royal blue, white buttons, collars, and cuffs. I kept trying them on until 2 of them fit. Then she gave me a huge cotton slip that looked like a tent dress and a nightgown that looked exactly like the slip. You are entitled to a clean uniform once a week. Once a week, I nearly screeched. Then they had to be crazy. Behind the guard, through the open door, I could see some of the women standing around. They were all, it seemed, black. They smiled and waved at me. It was so good to see them. It was like a piece of home. When are you going to unlock me and let me out of there? I asked, motioning to another woman, and the guard looked surprised. I don't know. You'll have to ask the warden. When can I see the warden? I pushed. I don't know. Well, why am I being locked in there? Why can't I go out there with the other women? I don't know. Then why can't you let me out? We were told you were to remain in your room. Well, how long am I supposed to stay in here locked up like this? I don't know. I saw it was useless. Would you please tell the warden or the sheriff that I would like to see him? I requested. The guard locked the door and was gone. The metal door was unlocked again. An ugly, shriveled white woman stood in front of the bars. My name is Miss Butterworth, and I am the warden of the women's section of the workhouse. She reminded me of a dilapidated horse. Yo. Well, JoAnne, is there something I can do for you? I didn't like her looks or her tone of voice, but I decided to ignore that for the moment and get to the business at hand. When can I be unlocked from this cell and go outside in the big room with other women? Well, I don't know, JoAnne. Why do you want to go out there? Well, I don't want to stay in here all day, locked up by myself. Why, JoAnne, don't you like your room? It's a very nice room. We had it painted just for you. That's not the point, I said. I would like to know when I will be able to be with other women. Well, JoAnne, I don't know when you'll be able to come out. You see, we have to keep you in here for your own safety because there are threats on your life. You know, JoAnne, she said, lowering her voice like she was speaking confidently. Oh, my bad. It's confidentially. Cop killers are not very popular in correctional institutions. Have any of the women here made threats against me? Well, I don't know, but I'm sure they have. I'll bet, I said to myself. Nobody has threatened my life. They just don't want to let me out of here. Well, JoAnne, the important thing is for you to behave and to cooperate with us so that we'll be able to send a good report to the judge. It's important for our girls to behave like ladies. This woman was making me sick. Did she think I was a fool enough to believe that either she or the judge was going to help me in any way? But it was the superior sounding tinge to her voice that really ticked me off. Butterworth, is it? I asked. What's your first name? Why, I never tell my girls my first name. I'm not one of your girls. I'm a grown woman. Why don't you tell people your first name? Are you ashamed of it? No, JoAnne, I'm not ashamed of my name. It's a matter of respect. I'm the warden here. My girls call me Miss Butterworth, and I call them by their first names. Well, you haven't done anything for me to respect you for. I give people respect only when they earn it. Since you won't tell me your first name, then I want you to call me by my last name. You can either call me Miss Shakur or Miss Chesimard. I know that's fucking right. I'm not going to call you by your last name. I'm going to continue calling you JoAnne. Well, that's okay by me. If you can stand me calling you Miss Bitch whenever I see you, I don't give anybody respect when they don't respect me. Lock the door, she told the guard and walked away. Days passed. Evelyn called the sheriff, the warden. There were 2 wardens in the jail, Butterworth and a man called Cahill. Cahill had all the power, though. Butterworth was only a figurehead and everybody else. Nothing more could be done outside of going to court. I had little or no feeling in my right arm. I knew I needed physical therapy if I was ever to use it again. I had to learn to write with my left hand, but that was no substitute. I needed a more specific diagnosis of exactly what had been damaged before I would know whether or not I would ever use it again, even with physical therapy. Isolation was... Oh, hold on. My bad. Isolation was driving me up the walls. I needed materials to write and to draw, paint, or sketch. All my requests went unheeded. I was permitted nothing, including peanut oil and a small ball to aid movement in my arm. When the jail doctor examined me, I asked him about my arm. Why? We doctors aren't gods, you know. There's nothing anyone can do when someone is paralyzed. But they said I might get better, I protested. Oh, yes, and the physical therapist at Roosevelt Hospital said that some peanut oil might help. Peanut oil, he asked, laughing. That's a good one. I can't write a prescription for that now, can I? My advice to you is to forget about all that stuff. You don't need any of it. Sometimes in life, we just have to accept things that are unpleasant. You still have one good arm. That goddamn cracker. I kept talking, but I could see I was wasting my time. He had no intention of even trying to help me. Well, would you at least prescribe some vitamin B? All right, but you really don't need it. Every time they called me to see the doctor after that, I went reluctantly. He would take my arm out of the sling and move it back and forth about 2 inches. Oh, yes, you're getting better, he would say. I always asked about physical therapy, and he always said there was nothing he could do. Finally, Evelyn went to court. Some of the items we petitioned for were ridiculous. In addition to physical therapy and nurse tests, we asked for peanut oil, a rubber ball, a rubber grip, books, and stuff to draw or paint with. The court finally granted a physical therapist if we would find one and pay the bill, but I never got one. It seems that no physical therapist in Middlesex County was willing to come to the prison to treat me, and only a physical therapist from Middlesex was permitted. But I did get the peanut oil and the grip, and in a short time, I had a whole physical therapy program worked out. I was receiving a lot of mail from all over the country. Most of it came from people I didn't know, mostly militant Black people, either in the streets or in prison. I got some hate mail, though, and some letters from religious people who were trying to save my soul. I wasn't able to answer all of those letters because the prison permitted us to write only 2 letters a week, subject to inspection and censorship by the prison authorities. It was hard for me to write anyway. I was also very paranoid about letters. I could not bear the thought of the police, FBI, guards, whoever reading my letters and getting daily insight on how I was feeling and thinking. But I would like to offer my sincerest apologies to those who were kind enough to write to me over the years and who received no answer. I spent my first month at the Middlesex County Workhouse writing. Evelyn had brought some newspaper clippings, and it was obvious the press was trying to railroad me, to make me seem like a monster. According to them, I was a common criminal, just going around shooting down cops for the hell of it. I had to make a statement. I had to talk to my people and let them know what I was about, where I was really coming from. The statement seemed to take forever to write. I wanted to make a tape of it and enlisted Evelyn's help. As my lawyer, she was dead set against it and advised me not to make the tape. But as a Black woman living in America, Evelyn understood why it was important and necessary. When the prosecutor found out about the tape, he tried to get her thrown off the case. She was ordered by the court never to bring a tape recorder again when she visited me. I made the tape of To My People on July 4th, 1973, and it was broadcast on many radio stations. Here's what I said. Black brothers, Black sisters, I want you to know that I love you, and I hope that somewhere in your hearts you have love for me. My name is Assata Shakur, slave name JoAnne Chesimard, and I am a revolutionary, a Black revolutionary. By that I mean that I have declared war on all forces that have raped our women, castrated our men, and kept our babies empty-bellied. I have declared war on the rich who prosper on our poverty, the politicians who lie to us with smiles, and all the mindless, heartless robots who protect them and their property. I am a Black revolutionary, and as such, I am a victim of all the wrath, hatred, and slander that America is capable of. Like all other Black revolutionaries, America is trying to lynch me. I am a Black revolutionary woman, and because of this, I have been charged with and accused of every alleged crime in which a woman was believed to have participated. The alleged crimes in which only men were supposedly involved. I have been accused of planning. They have plastered pictures alleged to be me in post offices, airports, hotels, police cars, subways, banks, television, and newspapers. They have offered over $50,000 in rewards for my capture, and they have issued orders to shoot on sight and shoot to kill. I'm a Black revolutionary, and by definition, that makes me a part of the Black Liberation Army. The pigs have used their newspapers and TVs to paint the Black Liberation Army as vicious, brutal, mad dog criminals. They have called us gangsters and gun moles and have compared us to such characters as John Dillinger and Ma Baker. It should be clear, it must be clear to anyone who can think, see, or hear that we are the victims and not the criminals. It should also be clear to us by now who the real criminals are. Nixon and his crime partners have murdered hundreds of third world brothers and sisters in Vietnam, Cambodia, Mozambique, Angola, and South Africa. As was proved by Watergate, the top law enforcement officials in this country are a lynching bunch of criminals. The president, 2 attorney generals, the head of the FBI, the head of the CIA, and half the White House staff have been implicated in the Watergate crimes. They call us murderers, but we did not murder over 250 unarmed Black men, women, and children, or wound thousands of others in the riots they provoked during the 60s. The rulers of this country have always considered their property more important than our lives. They call us murderers, but we are not responsible for the 28 brother inmates and 9 hostages murdered at Attica. They call us murderers, but we did not murder and wound over 30 unarmed Black students at Jackson State or Southern State either. They call us murderers, but we did not murder Martin Luther King Jr., Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, George Jackson, Nat Turner, James Chaney, and countless others. We did not murder by shooting in the back 16-year-old Rita Lloyd, 11-year-old Ricky Bodden, or 10-year-old Clifford Glover. They call us murderers, but we do not control or enforce a system of racism and oppression that systematically murders Black and third world people. Although Black people supposedly comprise about 15% of the total American population, at least 60% of murder victims are Black. For every pig that is killed in the so-called line of duty, there are at least 50 Black people murdered by the police. Black life expectancy is much lower than white, and they do their best to kill us before we are even born. We are burned alive in fire-trapped tenements. Our brothers and sisters OD daily from heroin and methadone. Our babies die from lead poisoning. Millions of Black people have died as a result of indecent medical care. This is murder. But they have got the gall to call us murderers. They call us kidnappers, yet Brother Clark Squire, who is accused along with me of murdering a New Jersey state trooper, was kidnapped on April 2nd, 1969 from our Black community and held on $1 million ransom in the New York Panther 21 conspiracy case. He was acquitted on May 13, 1971, along with all the others of 156 counts of conspiracy by a jury that took less than 2 hours to deliberate. Brother Squire was innocent, yet he was kidnapped from his community and family. Over 2 years of his life was stolen, but they call us kidnappers. We did not kidnap the thousands of brothers and sisters held captive in American concentration camps. 90% of the prison population in this country are Black and third world people who can afford neither bail nor lawyers. They call us thieves and bandits. They say we steal, but it was not we who stole millions of Black people from the continent of Africa. We were robbed of our language, of our gods, of our culture, of our human dignity, of our labor and our lives. They call us thieves. Yet it is not we who rip off billions of dollars every year through tax evasions, illegal price fixing, embezzlement, consumer fraud, bribes, kickbacks, and swindles. They call us bandits. Yet every time most Black people pick up our paychecks, we are being robbed. Every time we walk into a store in our neighborhood, we are being held up. And every time we pay our rent, the landlord sticks a gun into our ribs. They call us thieves. But we did not rob and murder millions of Indians by ripping off their homeland, then calling ourselves pioneers. They call us bandits. But it is not we who are robbing Africa, Asia, Latin America, or their natural resources and freedom while the people who live there are sick and starving. The rulers of this country and their flunkies have committed some of the most brutal, vicious crimes in history. They are the bandits. They are the murderers, and they say they should be treated as such. These maniacs are not fit to judge me, Clark, or any other Black person on trial in America. Black people should and inevitably must determine our destinies. Every revolution in history has been accomplished by actions, although words are necessary. We must create shields that protect us and spirits that penetrate our enemies. Black people must learn how to struggle by struggling. We must learn by our mistakes. I want to apologize to you, my Black brothers and sisters, for being on the New Jersey Turnpike. I should have known better. The Turnpike is a checkpoint where Black people are stopped, searched, and harassed and assaulted. Revolutionaries must never be in too much of a hurry or make careless decisions. He who runs when the sun is sleeping will stumble many times. Every time a Black freedom fighter is murdered or captured, the pigs try to create the impression that they have squashed the movement, destroyed our forces, and put down the Black Revolution. The pigs also try to give the impression that 5 or 10 guerrillas are responsible for every revolutionary action carried out in America. That is nonsense. That is absurd. Black revolutionaries do not drop from the moon. We are created by our conditions, shaped by our oppression. We are being manufactured in droves in the ghetto streets, places like Attica, San Quentin, Bedford Hills, Leavenworth, and Sing Sing. They are turning out thousands of us. Many jobless Black veterans and welfare mothers are joining our ranks. Brothers and sisters from all walks of life who are tired of suffering passively make up the BLA. There is and always will be, until every Black man, woman, and child is free, a Black Liberation Army. The main function of the Black Liberation Army at this time is to create good examples, to struggle for Black freedom, and to prepare for the future. We must defend ourselves and let no one disrespect us. We must gain our liberation by any means necessary. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. In the spirit of Ronald Carter, William Christmas, Mark Clark, Mark Essex, Frank Heavy Fields, Woody Changa, Alubala Green, sorry I butchered that, Fred Hampton, Little Bobby Hutton, George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, James McLean, Harold Russell, Zaid Malik Shakur, Anthony Como Alubala White. I butchered that. I'm so sorry. We must fight on. The workhouse had a whole heap of rules, most of them stupid. No newspapers or magazines were permitted. When I asked why we couldn't read newspapers, they told me the newspapers were inflammatory. Obviously, if a person read the paper that his or her sister had been raped, he would wait until the rapist come to jail and then do him bodily harm. But I protested. The other inmates watched television and listened to the radio. I wasn't allowed those either. They could receive the same information that way or from a visit from home. In that case, the warden told me, we don't let you read newspapers because they are a fire hazard. One of the saddest rules prohibited children from visiting their mothers in jail. I could see the children waiting outside, looking up at that ugly old building with sad, frustrated faces. Their mothers would run to the only window that faced the parking lot just to get a glimpse of their children. Yelling out of the window was a no-no, but once in a while somebody would get carried away. Sometimes their frantic screams went unheard. Gradually, I began to know the women. They were all very kind to me and treated me like a sister. They laughed like hell when I told them that I was supposedly being protected from them. Those first days, before I had really learned to maneuver with one hand, they did whatever they could to make things easier for me. They volunteered to iron my uniforms and sneak them into the laundry to be washed more than once a week. When they told me their charges and the time they were doing, I couldn't believe it. Quite a few of them were doing time for the numbers, either 6 months or a year. In New York, doing time for number running was practically unheard of, and it certainly didn't get 6 months or a year. Everybody in the world knows that the numbers business keeps the cops fat. These women hadn't hurt anybody or stolen anything, yet they were sitting in jail, probably busted by the same cops that they paid off. Their only crime was competing with the state lottery. Most of them had already been sentenced. If the sentence was less than a year, time was served in the county jail rather than in the state penitentiary. If I had expected to find so-called hardened criminals or big-time female gangsters or gun moles in the workhouse, I would have been sadly disappointed. The rest of the women who weren't doing time for the numbers were in for some form of petty theft like shoplifting or passing bad checks. Most of those sisters were on welfare, and all of them had been barely able to make ends meet. The courts had shown them no mercy. They brought in this sister shortly after I arrived who was 8 months pregnant and had been sentenced to a month for shoplifting, something that cost less than $20. Later, a middle-aged sister began coming to the workhouse on weekends. She worked during the week and served her 6-month sentence for drunken driving on weekends. Knowing that white women with the same charges would never have received such a sentence, I thought it was harsh. But I didn't realize how harsh until she told me that she had been arrested for drunken driving in the driveway of her own house. She hadn't even been on a public road. She was also told me that the cops had arrested her because they didn't like the way she talked to them. In that jail, it was nothing to see a woman brought in all beat up. In some cases, the only charge was resisting arrest. A Puerto Rican sister was brought in one night. She had been so badly beaten by the police that the matron on duty didn't want to admit her. "I don't want her dying on my shift," she kept saying. It was days before this sister was able to get out of bed. In spite of it all, those sisters kept the place jumping. They told all kinds of funny stories about their lives, things they had seen and experienced. Some had a natural knack for comedy. What amazed me was the way they told the saddest stories in the world and made everybody laugh about them. Girl, that nigga was always in my pocketbook stealing my money, and all he did with it was blow it at the racetracks. Girl, that man spent so much money on the racetracks, he made me wish I was a horse. One day I fixed his ass, though. I was sick and tired of his mess. Bet you he won't go in nobody's pocket no more, or no time soon. I put a mousetrap in that sucker. Girl, you should have heard that nigga howl. My husband and me, we used to fight like cats and dogs, and he was jealous as the day is long. Child, we used to go to the bar this night, and this nigga got all high and started thinking I was messing around with some dude at the bar. As soon as we got outside, boy, he jumped on me like a gorilla jumps on a banana. Don't you know that man hit me so hard, he knocked my teeth straight out of my mouth. Now, hold on 1 minute, I told that fool. We can fight later. I ain't got another $400 to spend on no false teeth. Child, he was drunk as skunks, down on our knees for about an hour looking for those teeth. And when that fool found them, he said the teeth jumped up and tried to bite him. Well, that man was a fool. God damn. Shit. What the fuck? I sound like that little girl. God damn. Oh, the shit our ancestors went through, man. Sick. I could listen to these stories only when the outside doors was open. During the day, they had a female sheriff officer posted outside my cell. When she was there, the door usually stayed open. The whole time I was at the jail, I saw very few white women. The few who did come were there only for a few hours a day or so before they were bailed out. There was one white woman who was busted on the turnpike with 50 pounds of reefer. Everyone waited to see what her bail would be. Then we found out she had been released on her own recognizance, that is, without bond. To be released on your own recognizance in the state of New Jersey, one of the requirements is Jersey residence. The woman lived in Vermont, but nobody was really shocked. She was white. I was going crazy in that cell. The only time they let me out was for visits and to see the so-called doctor. I've always been an active and restless person, and being locked up in a little cage all day drove me wild. I needed to stretch my legs. I started to run around the cell. I could run in this tiny circle until I was exhausted. 2 or 3 days after I started, the warden, Miss Bitch, accompanied by some male guards, visited me. "We hear that you are running around your cell," she said. "You have to stop this activity at once." "What? Why?" "Because you are disturbing the people downstairs." "What people?" There is an office underneath you, and you are disturbing the workers." "Are you crazy? They'll just have to be disturbed. I don't run for that long anyhow. If you let me go out into the yard to exercise with the other women, I'll start running around my cell." "I order you to stop running around your room." I don't remember joining your army," I said. "When I join your army, then you can order me around." She left in a huff, and I kept on running. That was the end of that. I know that's fucking right. I have to thank her, though. If she hadn't come and harassed me, I would have probably given up running around that tiny space in a few days. Yo, man. Assata is the shit. The food in the workhouse was horrible. Actually, it was disgusting. The food there is worse than the food in any jail that I have been in since. And that is quite an accomplishment. I would sit and wait for lunch or dinner hungry as hell, and they would bring me some greenish brown iridescent chunks floating around in a watery liquid. Liver stew, they called it, or some lamb fat floating around in some water, which was supposed to be lamb stew. And that nasty looking, foul smelling stuff tasted much worse than it looked. The place was infested with flies, and so was the food. The only thing edible was eggs, when they had them, and mashed potatoes. I lived off the nuts and candy I bought from the commissary and the fruit my family brought on visits. Every single day, for one whole week, they brought us this nasty stuff that was supposed to be ravioli. Well, that was the last straw. We all decided to go on food strike. I wrote a petition which everybody signed, and we sent down to the warden's office. Later, the warden agreed to discuss making the food more edible, but he refused to talk to me. He said that the fact that I had referred to the food as slop showed I was unreasonable. The food was better for a few days, and then it reverted to the same old nasty slop. The woman sheriff's officer who guarded me had to be the oldest dumb blonde alive. She played the part to a bust. She was nosy and was the world's biggest gossip. Every time she saw me, she smiled and pretended to be oh so friendly. One day, some workmen were drilling a big hole in the wall to install new electrical circuits. Of course, as soon as she came in, the nosy sheriff's officer began her questions. "What are they building?" I said, "Haven't you heard? Well, you know they passed a special law and they're going to execute me. They're building the gas chamber now." "Well," she said indignantly, "well, nobody told me about it." And she rushed off to find out why no one had informed her. Girl. The lights were turned off every night at 10. I was lucky because there was a night switch that I controlled in the bathroom adjacent to my cell. I would move the cot so that I was in as much light as possible. I would read my way into the night. When I tired of reading, I turn off the light and look out the window. Outside, police patrolled the area. A lot of times, there were 2 police on foot who seemed to be standing around in the parking lot. They carried rifles and shotguns. One night, in my usual condition of boredom, while standing at the window and feeling mischievous, I cried out like a bird. I cried out a bird-like sound in the shrillest voice I could muster. I'm not doing that. The pigs started looking around like crazy. They jerked this way and that way as if they thought someone was behind them. Again, I cried. That long shriek. This time, they really jumped around. You would have thought it was World War II and the Japanese were 2 feet away. I waited a while. When they calmed down, in a voice even shriller than before, I cried. It's a long, like, neigh sound. They pointed their guns and actually walked backward, prepared to fire at anything moving. Then, quite by accident, my metal cup fell to the floor. Well, in a second, they were down on the ground, crawling, holding their rifles. When I saw these fools crawling around on the ground like that, I just couldn't take it anymore. I laughed until I was sick. Great, big, bad police crawling around scared of their own shadows. Every once in a while, I tried it again, with different police, and usually the results were similar. But it was never as good as the first night. Because I had a broken clavicle, I had to wear a figure 8 brace around my shoulders. It was made of foam and cotton with a tiny belt buckle fastened in the back. About a half-inch wide, one morning, as I was eating, the guard came in my cell and took it. You can't have this. Why? Because it contains metal, she replied. You can't have anything with metal on it. Now there I was, sitting on a metal cot, drinking out of a metal cup, eating out of a metal bowl, and this policewoman was standing in my face telling me I couldn't have a brace because of a tiny metal buckle. I raised all the hell I could, but I saw that she was, like she said, like they all say, only following orders. The prison doctor says you need it, you can have it back. As soon as Dr. Miller came into the workhouse, I asked to see him. Without the brace, my shoulder felt weak and fragile. I could barely hold myself up straight. Don't worry about that old brace, her doctor replied. You don't need that thing anyway. It was all I could do not to kick him in his groin. Luckily, later that week, the bone specialist came out from the hospital to see me. He was a very good doctor and a very kind man. He told the warden in no uncertain terms that I needed my brace and without it I could be disfigured. He gave me a lot of encouragement for my hand so that I would regain full use of it. Finally, they returned the brace. It was about that time that the miracle started. I was sure now that my hand was coming back to life. I was getting to be able to tell it to do things and it would actually respond. Each little bit of progress was a miracle. Being able to touch my pinky with my thumb, to pick up a cup, to hold a pencil, to pinch myself were feats that took days of practice and exercise to accomplish. And then the day came when I knew I was almost there. After months of trying, I could finally snap my fingers. Whenever anyone came to see me, I would show them my new talents. I felt like a little kid saying, "Look, Mommy, see what I can do?" Finally, a joint conference was arranged between Sandiata, sorry, I butchered that name, Sandiata and me with Evelyn present. It took place at the workhouse. Sandiata was brought from the New Brunswick jail. I've never been happier to see anyone in my life. It was difficult to talk because the guards were practically sitting in our laps. I can't whisper for nothing, and Evelyn kept telling me to lower my voice. We talked about the case and decided that it was politically correct to be tried together. Just seeing Sandiata cooled me right out. I was feeling bad, and I was real self-conscious about how I looked. I had broken out in a horrible rash from the prison soap, and I looked like a lopsided scarecrow with bumps. There is something about Sandiata that excludes calm. From every part of his being, you can sense the presence of revolutionary spirit and fervor. And his love for Black people is so intense that you can almost touch it and hold it in your hand. There's nothing put on about him. He is a real folksy kind of person. Every time I see him, he looks like he belongs on a porch somewhere down south, breathing in the summer air and bouncing babies off his knee. The truth of the matter is that Sandiata is country. He would deny it to the bitter end, but he is show enough country. And when he laughs, that giggle laugh of his, it takes the trip to Texas in the backwoods. When the conference ended, I was a different person. I felt much stronger, and I didn't feel alone. I don't know when, but somewhere along the way, I started to collect the metal cups we were given to drink from. At first, I think it was just my slow way of drinking that caused the cups to accumulate. I was none too popular with the guards, especially the men. Most of them hadn't said boo to me and vice versa, but they hated my guts. To them, I was a cop killer and they were cops. Something told me to be real careful. They had given me a little table to eat and write on, and at night, before I went to sleep, I pushed the table up next to the bars and stacked the cups precariously on top of it. The bars opened into the cell, and the slightest movement would send the whole stack of cups clanking to the floor. I would push the wooden bench behind the table, and that way, anyone who tried to come in would have to apply some real pressure. I went through this routine every night, feeling slightly foolish but compelled. One night, in the middle of the night, the cups came crashing down. I immediately awoke to find 4 or 5 male guards standing in the doorway of my cell. I screamed, "What do you want? What are you doing in my cell?" loud enough for someone to hear me. The guards stood in the doorway like they didn't know what to do. Finally, one of them locked the door and said, "We heard a noise and we came to investigate. We were checking it out." They weren't even supposed to be in women's section. The female guard on duty that night, the slimiest one in the prison, was nowhere in sight. After that, no matter what jail I was in, I always found some way to barricade my cell. In prisons, it is not at all uncommon to find a prisoner hanged or burned to death in his cell. No matter how suspicious the circumstances, these deaths are always ruled suicides. They are usually Black inmates considered to be a threat to the orderly running of the prison. They are usually among the most politically aware and socially conscious inmates in the prison. When Eva came to the workhouse, it was something of an event. Usually she occupied the cell I was in. The rest of the women were housed in 2 open dormitories. The guards didn't know what to do with her. She had been in that jail many times before, and she was known as a hellraiser. Everybody said she was crazy. My first encounter with Eva was when she came over to the bars and sat down outside my cell and told me she could astral travel. She called it something like astral space projection. "I can go anywhere I want to, whenever I want to," she told me. "I've just come from Jupiter." "How was that?" I asked her. "Oh, it was fine. They had these cute little people. They were purple with crocodile skin and blue hair. You can go anywhere you want to," she told me. "You just have to project yourself." "Can you show me how to project myself the hell out of here?" "Oh, that's easy," she said. "I do it all the time. As a matter of fact, I'm not here now." "No," I said, "that's not good enough. I want to project my mind and body out of here." "You'll be in jail wherever you go," Eva said. Damn, ain't that the truth? "You have a point there," I told her. "But I'd rather be in a minimum security prison or on the streets than in a maximum security prison in here. The only difference between here and the streets is that one is maximum security and the other is minimum security. The police patrol our communities just like the guards patrol here. I don't have the faintest idea how it feels to be free." Eva told me that she knew how I felt. She had to know. Any Black person in America, if they are honest with themselves, have got to come to the conclusion that they don't know what it feels like to be free. We aren't free politically, economically, or socially. We have very little power over what happens in our lives. In fact, a Black person in America isn't even free to walk down the street. Walk down the wrong street and in the wrong neighborhood at night, and you know what happens. Eva and I got on famously. A lot of times, I didn't understand what in the world she was talking about, but at times, she made so much sense. I wondered if I was really wait, sorry, I read that really wrong. But at times, she made so much sense. I wondered if it was really the world that was crazy. She taught me a whole lot about prison, and she was forever telling me funny stories about her life. Eva was a huge sister. She weighed about 300 pounds. She had very dark skin, and her hair was cut short next to her scalp. People who have accepted white European standards of beauty would find her unattractive. But to me, there was something beautiful about her, and I loved to look at her. She is one of the few people that I have met in life who have the courage to be almost totally honest. Although altogether, Eva had spent about 10 years in the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey. She had been there in the old days when the women worked out on the farm. She told me how the women were treated, that state troopers would be called in for the slightest disturbance. She was there during a riot at Clinton and had seen state troopers beat the women mercilessly. Once they had been beaten, a pregnant woman so badly she lost her baby. Fucking pigs. Around this time, I started taking my little walks. Staying cooped up in the cage all day was driving me up the wall. So when the guards brought my food, I would walk past them into what was called the day room, where the women ate and watched TV. I would walk first to one dorm to the other and then return to my cell. There was no place I could run to since there was 2 or 3 locked doors between me and the outside. Most of the guards would nag me to come back into my cell, and after a short time, I would. But none of them got too crazy about it until one day, a guard yelled at me, "Get back here. Did you hear me? Get back here." If there's one thing I can't stand, it's being ordered around. And if there's another thing that makes me go wild, it's for a white person to talk to me in that tone of voice. "You make me come here?" Oh, I read that wrong. "You make me come here," I told her. "You so big and bad. I want you to see you make me come back there." Sorry, I had to yawn. She made a move like she was going to grab me. "You put your hands on me, and it's going to be me and you." No, that's fucking right, Assata. "You lay a hand on me, and I'm going to splatter your brains all over these walls." It's a good thing she didn't try me, though, because she outweighed me by at least 50 pounds, and I was still pretty much the one-armed bandit. But I would have given her a hell of a fight. I was mad and frustrated, and I had already stored up about 2 or 3 months of anger. Anyway, I finally went back into the cell when I was ready, but her attitude made me defiant. Whenever she opened my cell for anything, I would push past her and walk around for a minute. She would stand in a doorway like she was a door or something, and I would rear back and butt her out of the way. She was as big as a house, but she didn't have one bit of strength. Finally, she called the male guards. I was in one of the dorms talking to the women, wondering why she wasn't bothering me, when about 10 male guards came into the room. "Who is JoAnne Chesimard?" the head guard asked. Nobody said anything. "Which one of you is JoAnne Chesimard?" They looked like they were ready to leap on somebody. Again, no one responded. "All right, I'm going to ask you again. Which one of you is JoAnne Chesimard?" "I'm JoAnne Chesimard," Eva said. Well, when the guards took one look at Eva and saw how big she was, their tone changed immediately. "Miss Chesimard, would you please return to your cell?" One of the guards came from the back and tapped the sergeant on the shoulder. It's always hard for me to say that word. Shoulder. Whatever. "I know her," he said. "She's not Chesimard." "I am who you're looking for," I said. I didn't want Eva to get too involved in my madness. "I'll see you sisters later. I've had enough excitement for the moment." I walked past them and went to my cell and opened the book. The next day, this same guard managed to tick me off again. "I don't want any more trouble out of you," she said. I don't want to have to call the men again. You can call the National Guard, the militia, the FBI, and anybody else for all I care. You can call your mother if you want to." Talk that shit. I told her. As soon as she opened the door for lunch, I pushed right past her. I took my tray, sat down with the other women, and started eating my lunch. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I wanted to see what they were going to do. I had about 3 mouthfuls of food left on my plate when the goon squad came in. "All right, get up and get in your cell. As soon as I finish what I have on my plate." "Now," they ordered. "I only have 2 spoonfuls left." "Now," they beckoned to the female guard, "remove the prisoner to her cell." She came near me with her hands stretched out. "Don't you put your hands on me," I told her. "I'll walk to my cell." "Remove the prisoner to her cell," they ordered. She went to grab my arm, and all at once the room was in motion. Chairs, tables, cups, trays were flying in the air. Everybody was either running to get out of the way or fighting. The female guard made a wild dash for the door. The male guards jumped on me. I was hitting, kicking, scratching, punching, biting. I don't know what else. They finally managed to get me in my cell and the other women locked in their dormitories. None of the women was seriously injured. I had a few nicks and scratches, but otherwise I was fine, and I felt fine. Some of that anger pent up inside me had been released. One of the guards was wounded. Somehow his face had got cut. I know that's fucking right. Fuck that pig. He was the same little runt who had sat across from me in the hospital, pointing a shotgun at me and switching the safety on and off, talking about how he liked to kill animals. Nobody knows how he was cut or who cut him, but everybody knows that the hunter got hunted. I know that's fucking right. Later that day, they brought a photographer to photograph the evidence. The local newspaper later reported a riot at the workhouse. Some police and the sheriff came around and searched the jail. They said they were looking for the weapon that had cut the guard. They didn't find anything. That night, they came and got Eva. They took her to the V Room building, the New Jersey hospital for the criminally insane. She spent about 3 weeks there before she came back. The night she left, I felt sad and guilty. Here I had got her caught up in my madness. I was sitting and thinking about her. So I sat down and wrote this poem. Rhinoceros woman who nobody wants and everybody used. They say you're crazy because you're not crazy enough to kneel when told to kneel. Hey, big woman with scars on the head and scars on the heart that never seem to heal. I saw your light and it was shining. You gave them love. They gave you shit. You gave them you, and they gave you Hollywood. They purr at you because you know how to roar and back it up with realness. Rhinoceros woman, big mama in the little world. You closed your eyes and neon spun inside your head cause it was dark outside. You read your Bible, but God never came. Your daddy would have loved you, but that's what would the neighbors say. I read that really wrong. Your daddy would have loved you, but what would the neighbors say? They hate you, mama, because you expose their madness and their cruelty. They can see in your eyes 1,000 nightmares, and they have made some come true. Black woman, bad woman, wear your bigness on your chest like a badge because you done earned it. Strong woman, Amazon, wear your scars like jewelry because they were bought with blood. They call you mad and almost had you believing that shit. They called you ugly, and you hid yourself behind yourself and wallowed in their shame. Rhinoceros woman, this world is blind and sleight of mind and cannot see how beautiful you are. I saw your light, and it was shining. Most of the women benefited from the riot, though. Over the next few days, almost everybody was released or sent to some kind of program. The jail was particularly empty. It's strange how things work. When it suits the government's interest, they put people in jail for rioting. And when it suits their interest, they let them out of jail for the same thing. Afterward, the outer door to my cage remained shut at all times. This was no great deprivation since it had remained closed most of the time before anyway. One day, they brought me a big bushel of string beans. They grew a lot of their food at the workhouse. The men worked in the field. Here, we want you to snap these string beans. How much are you going to pay me? I asked. We don't pay no inmate nothing, but if you snap these beans, we'll let your door stay open while you snap them. I don't work for nothing. I ain't going to be no slave for nobody. Don't you know that slavery was outlawed? No, the guard said, you're wrong. Slavery was outlawed with the exception of prisons. Slavery is legal in prison. I looked it up, and sure enough, she was right. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution says, neither slave nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Well, that explained a lot of things. That explained why jails and prisons all over the country are filled to the brim with Black and third world people. While so many Black people can't find a job on the streets and are forced to survive the best way they know how. Once you're in prison, there are plenty of jobs, and if you don't want to work, they beat you up and throw you in the hole. If every state had to pay workers to do the jobs prisoners are forced to do, the salaries would amount to billions. License plates alone would amount to millions. When Jimmy Carter was governor of Georgia, he brought a Black woman from prison to clean the state house and babysit for Amy. Prisons are a profitable business. They are a way of legally perpetuating slavery. In every state, more and more prisons are being built, and even more on the drawing board. Who are they for? They certainly aren't planning to put white people in them. Prisons are part of the government's genocidal war against Black and third world people. On July 19, 1973, I was taken to New York to be arraigned on a Queens bank robbery indictment in Brooklyn federal court. The trip was like a surrealistic cartoon. There must have been at least 12 cars in the procession. The New Jersey State Trooper's car was stationed at every exit on the turnpike. All the cars had lights on and sirens going. Helicopter trailed us, and the pigs in the car I was in were comical. At every point, they said something like, "At least we got to the turnpike. At least we got to the bridge. At least we got to New York. At least we made it to the court." Whenever they passed a police car, they waved and sometimes raised their fist. When the Jersey police when the Jersey police were replaced by New York police at the bridge to Staten Island, they shook hands and gave each other the power sign. They even called each other brother. "This is my brother, Officer so and so." They acted like they were some dangerous mission inside Russia. They were actually afraid. White people's fear of black people with guns will never cease to amaze me. Probably it's because they think about what they would do were they in our place, especially the police, who have done so much dirt to black people. Their guilty conscience tells them to be afraid. When black people seriously organize and take up arms to fight for our liberation, there will be a lot of white people who will drop dead from no other reason than their own guilt and fear. In September, I was moved from the workhouse and entombed in a basement of the Middlesex County Jail, allegedly because of the jail's proximity to the Middlesex County Courthouse, where the New Jersey trial was scheduled to begin on October 1st. I was the first and last woman ever imprisoned there. It has always been a men's jail. When I arrived, I was given a dirty, scratchy horse blanket and one sheet. Thinking they had made a mistake, I asked for another sheet. "That's all you get?" they told me. "I can't sleep with that filthy thing over me. I need another sheet." "Sorry. Why am I allowed only one sheet?" "That's all the men get. We only give one because they might hang themselves." "They can hang themselves as easily with one sheet as they would with two," I reasoned. "Sorry. For me, to sleep on that filthy thing with one sheet was out of the question." I hooped and hollered, demanded they call my lawyer, and told the guard that the next time she came into the cage, I was going to wrap the sheet around her neck. Finally, she gave me another sheet. If I wrote 100 pages describing the basement of the Middlesex County Jail, it would be impossible for you to visualize it. It was a big, grayish, pukey green cell. The ceiling was covered with all kinds of pipes, some small, some huge, some dry, some leaky. There was no natural light, and the jailers refused to open the small windows located near the ceiling. The average temperature was 95 degrees. It was infested with ants and centipedes. I had never seen a centipede before, and they scared me to death. They were huge, albino monsters, and they crawled all over me. Family guards were stationed at the door of my cell 24 hours a day. Their job was to sit there and look in the cell at me. They could see every move I made. The first day, I moved the bed against the wall, away from guard surveillance so that I could have a little privacy while I was sleeping. The guards ordered me to move the bed into the middle of the floor. I refused. The next day, workmen nailed the bed to the floor in the center of the cell. They even peeked through the window in the bathroom when I was on the toilet or taking a shower. When I covered the peephole with a towel or a uniform, they ordered me to remove it and threatened to take away all towels and uniforms if I continued covering the window. I didn't refuse. I simply ignored them. After a while, they gave up. A month later, one of the sergeants told me that I was permitted to cover the window when I used the bathroom, but only for 3 minutes. There were 12 4-foot-long fluorescent light bulbs in the cage that were blinding. When I got ready to go to sleep the first night, I asked the guard to turn off the lights. She refused. "I can't see you if the light isn't on." "How in the world can you miss me? You can see everything in the cell." "Sorry." They kept me under those blinding lights for days. I felt like I was going blind. I was seeing everything in doubles and triples. Even when Evelyn, my lawyer, came to see me, I complained. Finally, after Evelyn accused them of torture, they turned the lights off at 11. But every 10 minutes or 15 minutes, they would shine a huge floodlight into the cell. Then the trial started. First, motions were argued. Practically all of our motions were denied. All the prosecutions were granted. Then jury selection began before Judge John E. Bachman. When they brought in the first jury panel, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. There were only a few blacks speckled here and there, and the panel looked more like a lynch mob than a jury. Most of the jurors openly glared at us as if they would kill us if they could. Half said they thought we were guilty. The other half, although they didn't say it right out, answered questions like they believed more or less they probably were guilty. I was convinced some of them deliberately lied just to get on the jury and convict us. Most of the few black people excused themselves on the grounds of hardship. They had children, families, jobs, and simply could not afford to be on a lengthy jury trial. If ever there was a case of the blues, I had it. Do something, I kept telling the lawyers. Do something. What can we do? The lawyers would answer. We're doing the best we can. It was true, but I just could not accept it. This was my life they were talking about. I must have bugged the lawyers to death. Object to this, object to that, I would tell them. Our objection is already on the record. Well, object again anyway. I was outraged, trapped, and helpless. Whenever a juror said something that revealed out of prejudice, the judge would try to clean it up. Poor Ray Brown, one of the defense lawyers, caught most of my fire. I want you to object. On what basis, he would ask. Don't you see it? The judge is asking leading questions. But the judge is legally allowed to ask leading questions during jury selection. Well, object anyway. I knew nothing about law then. I had never even seen a trial. I just couldn't understand how the judge could be so blatantly prejudiced in favor of the prosecution, and there was nothing we could do about it. Why can't y'all be like Perry Mason? I asked the lawyers jokingly. Did you ever see Perry Mason defend a black defendant? Ray Brown answered. So, damn. All right. Shit, it was a joke. God damn. Sundiata was a lifesaver. He would try to calm me down and would explain what to expect. Logically, I accepted what he said, but I was still frantic. We just can't let ourselves be railroaded, I said, coming up with one wild idea after another. Sundiata would patiently explain why none of my fantastic ideas would work. After a while of participating in my own legal lynching, I became convinced that Sundiata and I should fire the lawyers and defend ourselves. In that way, we wouldn't be tied to those stupid rules and we could say anything we wanted to. That's not true, Sundiata told me. Even if you defend yourself, you're still bound by their rules. How am I supposed to know those rules? I'm not a lawyer, and I still have a constitutional right to defend myself. True, but you still have to play according to their rules or they can bind and gag you. Look at what they did to Bobby Seale. Every time I looked up at the jury box, I'd argue the point again, but I also knew that I didn't know one thing about the law, and it was hard to picture myself actually defending myself. Evelyn was always repeating the old cliche that a person who defends himself has a fool for a lawyer. As I came closer and closer to completing the selection of the jury, I became more and more upset. Then one day, a kid who couldn't even have been more than 20 was being examined as a potential juror. He spilled the beans. The judge asked him if he had an opinion of the case, and he said, "They say she's guilty." The judge questioned him further, and he blurted it all out. The prospective jurors in the jury room were talking about the case, although they had been ordered not to discuss it. The judge asked what they were saying. "They say she's guilty." "Only Miss Chesimard?" the judge asked. "They're saying they're black, they're guilty." At the moment, the lawyers were all on their feet talking a mile a minute. They demanded a complete investigation of what was going on in the jury room. They wanted the juror asked more questions. They wanted the jurors to whom he talked questioned. The judge immediately realized the boy had opened a can of worms. He did everything he could to avoid opening the can any further, but it had gotten out of control. He finally agreed to conduct an impartial investigation. This time, when he questioned the jurors, he was very careful to downplay the gravity of what was going on in the jury room. But the other jurors substantiated what the boy had said. Our lawyers filed a motion asking that the jury be selected from another county because we couldn't get a fair trial in Middlesex. The assignment judge, not Judge Bachman, was to decide the motion. Meanwhile, the trial was stopped. Evelyn told me the decision. The assignment judge had determined that it was in fact true that we couldn't get a fair trial in Middlesex County. The jury was to be picked from Morris County. Where's that? I asked Evelyn. She said she hadn't the faintest idea. Then Ray Brown came in. Where in the world is Morris County? I asked him. Well, he said, I'll tell you. Morris County was almost completely white, with very few black people and even fewer Hispanics and Asians. What does that mean? Are there 10% black people, 5%, or what? A whole lot fewer. A jury of your peers, Evelyn said bitterly. What can we do? I asked. We'll just have to wait and see. Can we get the trial moved somewhere else where there are more black people? We can try, but don't get your hopes too high. I was coming back to earth and fast. The trial had been postponed for about a month until January because they needed time to secure the jail in Morristown in Morris County. Maybe, I thought, the lawyers will come up with something by then. I really didn't expect too much, but it seemed like such an obvious trick, such an obvious ploy to ensure that we didn't receive a fair trial by a jury of our peers, that I thought maybe something could be done about it. I was naive in those days. I knew it in theory, but I had not seen enough to accept the fact that there was absolutely no justice whatsoever for black people in America. I still had some hope left. But they had taken something that was supposed to help us and turned it against us. They had used the law to abuse the law. Now, all we have to do, I reasoned, is get the facts and figures and prove that they are trying to deny us a fair trial. How little did I know? All right, so that's the end of chapter 3. And yeah, this shit just keeps getting better. But so I hope y'all enjoyed it. Again, I hope y'all check on each other with all the shit going on in the world. And like always, let's get free.